Good morning, everyone. We are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 10, Discourse 47, which is on the dialogue between Uddhava and the gopis and Radha's ode to a black bee. Sri Shuka began again. So the context of this, as we had last time, is that Krishna's friend Uddhava from Mathura is visiting Vrindavana in the villages of Raja to bear a message from Krishna to his childhood family and friends. Gazing on the aforesaid servant of Sri Krishna with unusually long arms, eyes resembling a pair of fresh blown lotuses and a bright lotus-like countenance, clad in yellow and wearing a garland of lotuses and adorned with earrings brilliant with gems, all the women of Raja with bright smiles eagerly surrounded Uddhava, who had taken shelter under the lotus feet of Sri Krishna, the illustrious Lord, wondering who he was, with a handsome appearance and dressed and adorned in the style of that immortal Lord, whence he had come and whose son he was. Son meant metaphorically. Evidently, he has taken to dressing the way Krishna dresses because Krishna has probably started a fashion in Mathura. Concluding him to be a messenger from Sri Krishna, who was no other than Lord Vishnu, the spouse of goddess Rama, the gopis, bent low with modesty, inquired of him in private when he had been duly greeted with bashful smiles and glances and kind words, etc., and had squatted on a seat. Squatted on a seat is an interesting detail. You still see people in India very frequently when they get together to talk, they just like find a nice spot to squat, and they just squat there for hours talking to each other rather than sitting down the way people in the West typically do. We know you to be a companion of Sri Krishna, the Lord of the Yadus, duly arrived in our midst. You have been dispatched here by your master with intent to bring delight to his parents. Otherwise, we do not find anything worth remembering for him in Vraja, a pasture land for cows. Ties of affection for one's relations are most difficult to disregard even for a hermit. Friendship with others, like that cultivated by lovers with their sweethearts or by black bees with flowers, actuated as it is by self-interests, lasts till one's interests continue, as long as one's interests continue to be served, and is a travesty of love. Harlots forsake a destitute, the people an incapable ruler, students who have learned what they wanted to learn, their teacher, the priests officiating at a sacrifice, the yajamana who has paid the sacrificial fees at the end of the yajna, the birds, a tree from which fruits have disappeared, strangers, a dwelling after finishing their meal, animals, a burnt forest, and a paramour, a women attached to him, the moment he has enjoyed her. In this way, when Uddhava, the messenger of Sri Krishna, arrived in Vraja, the gopi women, whose speech, body, and mind were undoubtedly devoted to Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, cast to the winds all worldly etiquette. Recalling again and again the exploits of Sri Krishna, their beloved Lord, that pertained to his boyhood and infancy, they celebrated them in song and wept, all sense of shame having taken leave of them. Musing over her union with Sri Krishna and perceiving a black bee in front of her at that moment, a certain gopi, said to be both by commentators like Sanatana Goswami and by the Agni Purana, which refers specifically to this verse in the Bhagavata Purana, that this gopi is Radha, Sri Radha herself, fancied the bee to be a messenger dispatched by Sri Krishna and spoke to the bee as follows. The gopi Radha said, "O sucker of honey, O friend of Sri Krishna, the treacherous lover, pray do not touch our feet with your tentacles tinged with the saffron of the garland pressed against the breasts of our rivals. Let Sri Krishna, the chief of the Madhus, whose messenger you are, you who are distinguished by such characteristics, bear the token of favor of those proud ladies, which would be an object of ridicule for the court of the Yadus. Having allowed us to drink the entrancing nectar of his lips but once, he deserted us innocent women all of a sudden, as a black bee like you would leave the flowers. I wonder how Lakshmi, who is reputed to be very clever and discerning, continues to serve his lotus feet. Presumably, she does so because she has her mind captivated. Alas, by the honeyed words of our illustrious Lord. Why do you, O six-legged one, glorify before us homeless people here at length Sri Krishna, the Ancient One? Let his stories be sung in the presence of the lady companions of Sri Krishna. They will confer on you the object of your desire, beloved as they are of him, and have the agony of their heart soothed. What women are there on earth, in heaven, or in the subterranean regions, who are hard to win for the playful movements of his eyebrows, accompanied by his cunning and winsome smiles? Of what account are we in his eyes, whose dust of feet even Lakshmi worships? Nevertheless, tell him that the epithet of Uttama Shloka, one enjoying excellent fame, as a matter of fact, applies to him who espouses the cause of the forlorn like us. Leave my foot on which you have placed your head, acquainted as I am with you, who know how to win over others with blandishments and messages, having learnt this art from Sri Krishna, referring to the bee which has landed on her foot. He left here us, who had for his own sake renounced our children, husband, and even the other world, fickle-minded as he is. What then is to be gained by coming to terms with him? Hard-hearted by nature, he, in his previous avatarana, Sri Rama, hit Vali like a hunter, and domineered over by his consort Sita, deformed a woman who had approached him with lust. Having accepted Bali's worship, he bound him as a crow would surround its feeder after eating the food offered by the latter. Therefore, enough of friendship with those possessed of a dark hue. The treasure in the form of his story is difficult to forego. With their natural propensities existing as pairs of opposites uprooted by tasting but once even a small bit of his supremely delightful stories, which fall as nectar on their ears, and thus completely ruined and leaving all of a sudden their home and family in a wretched condition, many men here lead a life of mendicants, deprived of enjoyment like so many birds. Believing as true the professions on the part of that cheat, as the she-deer, the foolish companions of a black antelope would put faith in the music of a hunter and suffer the torment of being hit by a shaft. We ignorant sweethearts of Sri Krishna have repeatedly suffered this fate, having been subjected to smarting pangs of love occasioned by the touch of his nails. O messenger, let any other topic be discussed. O friend, and no more Sri Krishna. O friend of our beloved Lord, sent by our darling, have you come again? Ask what you would, for you are worthy of honor to me, O dear one. How will you take us who are here to his side, whose companionship is difficult to forego? His spouse Sri, O gentle one, ever remains with him on his very bosom in the form of a golden streak. Is my darling now at Mathura? Does he remember, O gentle one, his paternal house, as well as his relations and the other cowherds? Does he ever make any references to us, his maidservants? Oh, when will he place his arm, more fragrant than aloe wood, on our head? Sri Shuka resumed. On hearing this effusion of love, evidently mixed with chiding at having been left, Uddhava forthwith spoke as follows to the Gopi women, who had been pining for a sight of Sri Krishna, comforting them with messages from their beloved Lord. Uddhava said, Oh, you have your objects accomplished indeed and are the adored of the worlds, and that your mind is so absorbed in Lord Vasudeva. Devotion to Sri Krishna indeed is sought to be attained through charitable gifts, fasting, austerities, pouring oblations into the sacred fire, muttering prayers, study of the Vedas, self-control, and various other virtuous practices. It is a matter for congratulation that the ideal of supreme devotion to the divine Lord of excellent renown, which is hard to attain even for sages, has been set up by you. It is gratifying that you have sought the Supreme Person under the name of Sri Krishna, neglecting your children, husbands, and other relations, dwellings, your very bodies. Due to your separation from the Lord, you have developed exclusive devotion to Sri Krishna, which has enabled you to behold him in all that meets the eye. You have conferred a great boon on me, by thus affording me an opportunity to witness your unprecedented love with my own eyes, O highly blessed ones. Now listen to the message of your darling Sri Krishna. which I am sure will bring joy to you, and carrying which I, who execute his secret commissions, have come, O good ladies. The glorious Lord says, your separation from me, the material cause of all, and therefore present in all as their very self, is not possible under any circumstance. As the elements, ether, the air, fire, water, and earth, are present in all created beings as their constituents, so am I, underlying as I do the mind, the vital airs, the elements, the indriyas, and the gunas. In myself do I create, maintain, and dissolve myself in the form of the cosmos by dint of my own maya, by myself in the form of the elements, the indriyas, and the gunas. The spirit is all knowledge, transcendent, unconnected with the gunas, and absolutely pure. It is experienced through the states of the mind, brought about by maya. Remaining vigilant, one should control that mind, through which one conceives the objects of sense, though unreal, like one who, when awake, recalls the object seen in a dream and seizes the senses. In the eyes of the wise, the Vedas, the path of yoga, the Sankhya system of philosophy, renunciation, suffering hardships for the sake of one's faith, subjugation of one's senses, and truthfulness, have their goal in mind control, meaning control of one's own mind, even as rivers terminate in the ocean. It is only with intent to focus your thought constantly on me in order to ensure your mental proximity with me that I, your darling, am actually staying far from your eyes. The mind of women, as well as of others, does not get so absorbed in the thought of their most beloved one living close by and open to their view, as in that of one staying at a distance. Incessantly thinking of me, having devoted to me your whole undivided mind, which has completely shed all thoughts, you will come to me before long. Those blessed gopi women who stayed away in Vraja and could not get an opportunity to sport with me while I diverted myself in the woodland of Vrindavana one night, attained to me through contemplation on my exploits. Sri Shuka continued, delighted to hear the message of Sri Krishna, their most beloved Lord, the aforesaid women of Vraja spoke to Uddhava, their memories of Sri Krishna having been awakened by his message. The gopis said, by good luck, Kansa, the enemy and persecutor of the Yadus, has been killed along with his followers. It is a matter for gratification that Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, is now doing well with his relations, who have attained all their objects through him. And other gopis said, does Sri Krishna, elder brother of Gada, who was greeted with our loving and pleasing glances, accompanied by bashful smiles, bring delight to the women of the city, O gentle one? And other gopis said, how can he, an expert in lovemaking and beloved of charming women, help being won over when greeted by their sweet words and amorous gestures? And another gopi said, does Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, O pious one, remember us rustic women in any context in the course of an unreserved talk in an assembly of the ladies of the city? And another gopi said, does he ever recall those nights during that period when he sported with us, his sweethearts, in the woodland of Vrindavana, charming with lilies and jasmines as well as with a full moon? And literally what she called the moon is the hair marked, referring to what in the West people call the man in the moon. In ancient India, they thought it looked like a rabbit, and they called it the rabbit in the moon. So she is calling the moon the rabbit marked as a way of referring to the moon. In the ring of the rasa dance, accompanied by the sound of jingling anklets, in the course of which his delightful stories were sung, will Sri Krishna, a scion of Dasharha, ever come over here to infuse new life into us, tormented with grief occasioned by separation from him, by the soothing touch of his delightful limbs, even as the god of rain would refresh a forest scorched with summer heat by sending clouds of rain? And another gopi said, wherefore should Sri Krishna come here now that he has slain his enemies and attained sovereignty, and surrounded by all his kinsmen, will feel extremely delighted when he has married many princesses? And another gopi said, what purpose of the high-souled Sri Krishna, the spouse of Sri, who has all his desires fulfilled and is ever perfect in his own self, could be served by us dwelling in a forest, or even by other ladies of royal descent? Even Pingala, a wanton woman, spoke of hopelessness as the only road to supreme happiness. Though we know all that, our hope to meet Sri Krishna is nevertheless hard to overcome. Who can dare withdraw his mind from the confidential talk of Sri Krishna, from whose person Sri never gets down, even though he does not long for her? Alas, the river Yamuna, the mountain Govardhana, and the forest lands of Vrindavana, the cows and the notes of flutes over there, hallowed by Sri Krishna coupled with Sankarshana, Almighty Uddhava, awaken again and again the memory of Sri Krishna, the son of Nanda, our cowherd chief, through his footprints, the abodes of all charm and prosperity. Surely we cannot forget him. How can we forget him, O Uddhava? We whose mind has been captivated by his charming gait, pleasing laughter, and playful glances, as well as by his honeyed words. O Lord, O spouse of Rama, O savior of Raja, O reliever of our agony, O protector of cows, lift Gokula out of the ocean of suffering in which it lies plunged. Sri Shuka went on. The gopis, whose agony of separation from the Lord was now gone to a large extent, thanks to the messages received from Sri Krishna, worshipped Uddhava, recognizing him to be Sri Krishna himself and their very self. He stayed for some months there in order to drive away the grief of the gopi women. Celebrating in song the story of the Leelas of Sri Krishna, he brought to light to the entire village of Gokula. As long as the aforesaid Uddhava lived in Nanda's Vraja, the days passed like moments with the people of Vraja in talks about Sri Krishna, eagerly observing the river, the woodlands, and the dales, as well as the trees in blossom, and vividly reminding the inhabitants of Vraja of Sri Krishna by questioning them about the Leelas connected with the various spots, like touring around asking what did Krishna do over here, what did he do over there, and so on. Uddhava, the servant of Sri Krishna, spent his time in delight. Supremely delighted to perceive the anguish of mind, as depicted before, and of an allied nature of the gopis, occasioned by their absorbing thought of Sri Krishna, and bowing to them in reverence, Uddhava sang as follows. These gopi women, alone on earth, have justified their possessing a human body, in that they have developed supreme love exclusively for Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, the soul of the universe, a love which not only strivers afraid of metempsychosis, but sages, nay, even we devotees of the Lord aspire for. What else is there to be gained through births as a Brahmana by him who has developed a taste for the stories of Sri Krishna, the deathless Lord? The two are quite out of keeping with one another. These women, roaming about in woods and polluted in the eyes of adverse critics through infidelity to their husbands, and surpassing unflinching love for Sri Krishna, the Supreme Spirit, as depicted above. Surely the Almighty Lord directly and liberally confers final moksha on him who constantly remembers him, though not knowing his reality, as nectar does good when used, whether or not one knows. Oh, the grace which descended on the gopis of Vraja, who attained the object of their desire in the form of having their necks encircled by his strong arms during the Rasa festival, did not fall to the lot of celestial apsaras possessing the fragrance and splendor of a lotus, or of Sri, who is exclusively attached to his person. How could others expect such favor from him? Oh, let me be reborn as any one of the shrubs, creepers, or herbs in the woodlands of Vrindavana, catching the dust of feet of these blessed ladies who successfully trod the path of devotion leading to Sri Krishna, the path which is to be strenuously sought for even by the Upanishads. Neglecting their own people as well as the path trodden by the virtuous, which are difficult to abandon, these gopis completely shook off their agony of separation from the Lord, embracing as they did those lotus feet of the divine Sri Krishna, which are actually fondled by the goddess Sri and mentally adored by great gods like Brahma and others, sages that have all their desires fulfilled and are free from all cravings, even by masters of yoga like Shiva, Sanaka, and Narada, and which were lovingly placed by the Lord on their bosom in the gathering of women on the occasion of the Rasa dance. I repeatedly salute the dust of the feet of these blessed women of Nanda's Vraja, whose loud singing of the stories of Sri Krishna, who captivates all, purifies the three worlds. Sri Sukha proceeded further. Seeking the permission of the Gopi women, as well as of Yashoda and Nanda, and taking leave of the Gopas, Uddhava, a scion of Dasharha, now ready to depart back from Mathura, mounted the chariot. Duly approaching him, when he had just stepped out of Nanda's house with various presents intended for Sri Krishna and Balarama in their hands, Nanda and others lovingly addressed him in feeling terms with tears in their eyes. Let all the activities of our mind ever hinge on the lotus feet of Sri Krishna. Let our speech utter his names, and let our body remain engaged in bending before him, and so on. Being tossed by our karmas, coupled with the will of providence, wherever, in whatever species of life we may be, let our delight be ever found in the Almighty Sri Krishna as a result of our virtuous actions and charitable gifts. Thus honored by the Gopas out of devotion to Sri Krishna, O ruler of men, Uddhava came back to Mathura, which was now protected by the Lord Sri Krishna. Falling prostrate before Sri Krishna, he spoke to him of the plenitude of devotion of the people of Raja and handed over the presents to him, as well as to Vasudeva, Balarama, and the Raja Ugrasena. Thus ends the 47th discourse bearing on the return of Uddhava to Mathura in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 48. The Lord pays a visit to Kubja, the hunchbacked woman, and Akrura at their respective places. Sri Sukha began again. So you may recall that when Krishna first came to Mathura, a hunchbacked woman called Trivakra had an interaction with him in the street where he healed her body of its deformity, and she pretty forthrightly romantically propositioned him and invited him to her house, and he said that he would visit later. So this is following up on that. Sri Sukha began again. Perceiving what was in the mind of Trivakra, the former maidservant of Kamsa, smitten as she was with pangs of love for Sri Krishna, and seeking her gratification, the all-seeing Lord, the soul of the universe, called at her house, which was equipped with costly articles of household use and supplemented by devices stimulating passion, such as erotic pictures, embellished with strings of pearls and flags, canopies, beds and seats, as well as with fragrant incenses, lights, wreaths, and perfumes. Evidently, she has been prepared ever since Krishna said he was going to come to her house. She's been spending money and decorating for him. Seized with a flurry, as a matter of fact, to perceive him coming to her house, she stood up at once from her seat, and meeting him with due ceremony along with her female companions, honored Sri Krishna, the unfailing Lord, by offering him a good seat and other articles of worship. Duly honored by her in a like manner, Uddhava squatted on the floor, touching the seat offered by her with his head. Following the practices of the worldly minded, Sri Krishna, for his part, quickly settled down on the costly bed. Duly preparing herself with a bath, pigments, fine linen, jewelry, garlands, perfumes, betel leaves chewed with catechu, lime, and areca nut parings, etc., nectar-like beverage, and so on, she approached Sri Krishna, a scion of Madhu, with shy looks accompanied by sportful smiles and amorous gestures. Calling to his side the lovely damsel, timid through bashfulness occasioned by her first meeting with him as a lover, and seizing her by the hand adorned with a bracelet, the Lord set her on the bed with him and dallied with the charming girl, her only merit entitling her to this rare privilege and honor being that she had willingly offered to him sandal paste, which was meant for Kamsa. Enjoying the transcendent smell of his feet and brushing off the suffering of her breasts, bosom, and eyes, tormented with the pangs of love, by the soothing and thrilling touch of the feet of Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, she folded in her arms the all-blissful darling who rested on her bosom and got rid of her agony of separation from him of very long standing. Alas, having thus secured by offering pigment the presence of Sri Krishna, the Almighty Lord, the bestower of final moksha, so difficult to attain, the hapless woman, unlike the blessed gopis, who dedicated their all to him and sought nothing in return, asked of him the gratification of her carnal desire, although her physical contact alone with the all-blissful and all-powerful Lord was enough to ensure for her the highest blessing in the form of final moksha. She said, "Be pleased to stay here in my house for a few days and make merry with me, my most beloved friend, for I dare not forego your company, O lotus-eyed one." Granting her the desired boon, and honoring her with suitable presents and polite words, and thereby acknowledging her service, Sri Krishna, the ruler of all, who respects the wishes of all, having promised to return and revel with her again, returned with Uddhava to his own abode in Vasudeva's house, his father's house, which was full of prosperity. He who, having duly propitiated Sri Krishna, the all-pervading Lord, the ruler even of universal lords, Brahma, Shiva, and others, who is so hard to please except through devotion, asks for that which is acceptable to the mind of perverted to the mind, as in to the worldly mind in this case, is of perverted understanding because of his pettiness, or her pettiness in this case, and that the only boon she asks of him is sexual pleasure, which he grants her because she served him and that's what she wants. But she could have gotten much more than that. Wishing to get Akrura to do some errand of his, and also with intent to oblige him, Lord Sri Krishna, accompanied by Balarama and Uddhava, visited in state the residence of Akrura. Overjoyed to perceive from a distance the aforesaid jewels among the best of men, who were his own relations, and rising to receive them, he embraced and welcomed them. He bowed to Sri Krishna and Balarama, and greeted by them in return, duly worshipped them who had now taken their seat. Sprinkling over his head in every direction the water with which he had washed their feet, a protector of men, and honoring them with articles of worship, as well as with exquisite robes, sandal paste, garlands, and excellent jewels, Akrura, who was bent low with humility, bowed down to them with his head, and kneading their feet that rested on his lap, spoke to Sri Krishna and Balarama. "Luckily by you two, the sinful Kamsa has been slain along with his followers, and this race of yours not only saved from a calamity which was hard to get over, but made to prosper. You two are Prakriti and Purusha, the causes of the universe and one with the universe. There is neither any cause nor any effect apart from you two. Entering after its creation, this universe, evolved by yourself through the instrumentality of your own potencies, O Krishna, Supreme Lord, you are perceived in various forms within the range of hearing and sight. Even as the elements appear in various forms in created beings, mobile and immobile, the media of their manifestation, so do you, the absolute self, entirely self-dependent, appear in numberless forms in the various worlds, the fields of your manifestation. Through the instrumentality of your own potencies in the shape of the gunas, Raja, Sattva, and Tamas, you evolved and protect and reabsorb the universe. You are not bound by those gunas or by those actions. Under no circumstance whatsoever can ignorance be attributed to you, who are consciousness itself. A body and other adjuncts, being unascertained, birth and differences cannot be directly ascribed to the spirit. Hence, there can be neither bondage nor liberation for you. What appears as bondage or liberation in you is only our ignorance about you and a reflection of our mind. Each time this dateless path of the Vedas, taught by you for the good of the world, is obstructed by false creeds of a heretical type, you assume a path consisting of sattva. As such, O Lord, you are born this time in the house of Vasudeva here, with your own part manifestation, Balarama, in order to remove the earth's burden by destroying hundreds of Akshauhinis, of kings who are partial, and that's obviously a huge exaggeration of the number, but numerous rulers who are partial incarnations of demons, and in order to spread the glory of this race, the race of the Yadus. Highly blessed indeed are our dwellings today that you, O Lord, who are above sense perception, have visited. You, the well-known Father and Guru of the universe, manifested in the form of all the gods, ancestors, spirits, and kings, the waters washing whose feet sanctify the three worlds. What wise man would seek as his protector anyone other than you, who are truthful of speech, friendly, grateful and loving to your votaries, and who grant all the desires of a pure-hearted devotee, bestow on him your very self, to which neither growth nor decay can be attributed. Luckily enough, O Lord, who are supplicated by men, you have been perceived by us here at our very house, you whose ways cannot be easily comprehended even by masters of yoga like Sanaka, and rulers of devas like Indra. Pray dispel at once your Maya in the shape of ties of attachment to our children, wife, wealth, relations, houses, body, and so on. Sri Shuka continued. Thus honored and glorified by his devotee, Lord Srihari smilingly replied to Akrura, enchanting him, as it were, by his sweet and polite words. The glorious Lord said, "You are our guru and uncle, nay, our praiseworthy friend. We ever deserve to be protected, nourished, and treated with compassion by you, as a matter of fact, since we are your children. Highly blessed and most worthy souls like you deserve constantly to be adored by men seeking blessedness. Devas are, after all, actuated by self-interest, but not so the pious, who habitually do good to others without expecting any return from them. It is not that there are no purifying agencies in the shape of rivers, lakes, etc., consisting of water, and no deities made of clay and stone. They, however, exert a purifying influence through a long process of time, whereas pious souls do so through their very sight. As such, you were the foremost of our friends. Therefore, with intent to do a good turn to my cousins Yudhishthira and the other sons of Pandu, proceed you to, this is the first we've heard of them. We have obviously heard and even seen them in scenes earlier in the Bhagavatam, but those took place later than this in time. Proceed you to Hastinapura, the capital of the Kauravas, for making inquiries about them. Brought back from the forest where King Pandu lived to his capital by the blind king Dhritarashtra. Their father having died recently, the boys are living in a most miserable condition, with their mother Kunti, my aunt, so we have heard. Sure enough, the feeble-minded Raja Dhritarashtra, the son of Ambika, who is blind and follows the will of his vile son, does not behave impartially towards his nephews. Go, therefore, and ascertain his behavior towards them now, whether it is good or bad. Having definitely known it, rather than simply heard the rumors, we shall so arrange that the welfare of our relations, the Pandavas, may be ensured. Having thus duly instructed Akrura, the Almighty Lord Sri Krishna, who alleviates the suffering of his devotees, then returned directly to his own residence, along with Sankarshana and Uddhava. Thus ends the 48th discourse in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sanhita. Discourse 49, Akrura's visit to Hastinapura. Sri Shuka began again. Going to Hastinapura, marked with the glory of the kings of Puru's race, Akrura saw there Dhritarashtra, the son of Ambika, accompanied by Bhishma, Vidura, Prita, Prita is another name of Kunti, the mother of the Pandava brothers, technically only the mother of 3 of the 5 of them. Bahlika, uncle of Bhishma, along with his son Somadatta, Drona, the son of Bharadvaja, accompanied by Kripa, a scion of sage Gotama, as well as Karna, Suyodhana. Suyodhana is another name for Duryodhana. Ashvatthama, the son of Drona, Yudhishthira and his 4 brothers, the sons of Pandu, and other friends. Meeting his relatives in an appropriate manner, Akrura, the son of Gandini, was duly questioned by them about the welfare of their relatives at Mathura, and himself inquired about their well-being in return. He stayed there for some months with intent to ascertain the conduct towards the sons of Bandu, of the Raja Dhritarashtra, who had vile sons and little moral strength, and followed the will of the wicked, his brother-in-law Shakuni, Karna, and others. Prita, as well as Vidura, another half-brother of Dhritarashtra and a true friend and benefactor of the Pandavas, told Akrura of all the evil in the shape of attempting to murder them with poison, etc., that had already been done and was further sought to be done by Duryodhana and others, the sons of Dhritarashtra, who were envious of the majesty, military skill, bodily strength, prowess, modesty, and other excellent qualities of Prita's sons, as well as of the love which the people bore for them. Approaching her cousin Akrura, who was at hand, and recollecting her birthplace in Mathura, Prita, for her part, spoke to him, so that Prita is Kunti, came to Akrura and spoke to him with teardrops in her eyes. Do my parents, Shurasena and Marisha, and brothers, sisters, one of her brothers is Vasudeva, her sisters Srutadeva, and so on, and nephews, ladies of the household like Devaki, Rohini, and others, as well as my female friends, remember me? Does my nephew, Lord Sri Krishna, who is fit to protect all and is so fond of his devotees, as well as the lotus-eyed Balarama, remember Yudhishthira and others? Will he ever care to console with his comforting words me, grieving as I do in the midst of enemies, even as a she-deer would do in the midst of wolves, as well as these fatherless boys of mine? O Krishna, O enchanter of all, O great yogi, wielder of mystic powers, O soul of the universe, O savior of all, O deliverer of cows, protect me that have sought you as my refuge and am suffering with my children. For men afraid of death and future birth, I find no asylum other than your lotus feet, which are capable of conferring liberation on their worshippers, almighty that you are. Hail to you, the enchanter of all, the all-pure absolute Brahman, the supreme spirit, the master of yoga, yoga personified. I have sought you as my refuge. Sri Shuka continued. Remembering thus her own kinsfolk, and particularly Sri Krishna, the Lord of the universe, O Raja, your great-grandmother, Kunti, wept bitterly, afflicted as she was. Akrura, to whom joy and sorrow made no difference, and the highly renowned Vidura, comforted Kunti by reminding her of those responsible for the birth of her sons, the Devas, Dharmavayu, Indra, and the Ashvino. Approaching the Raja Dhritarashtra, who differentiated between his own sons and his nephews and was particularly fond of the former, while about to return to Mathura, Akrura repeated in the midst of his kinsmen what was communicated to the Raja out of goodwill by his relations, Sri Krishna, Balarama, and others. Akrura said, O son of Vichitravirya, O enhancer of the glory of the Kurus, your younger brother Pandu, having demised, you have now ascended the throne of Hastinapura, ruling over the earth with piety, gratifying the people with your good conduct, and behaving impartially towards your own people. You will attain prosperity and renown. Acting otherwise, you will be censured in the world during your lifetime and go to Naraka after your death. Therefore, behave impartially towards the sons of Pandu and your own. And there is no living together perpetually with anyone anywhere in this world, even with one's own body, O Raja. How then could one expect to live eternally with one's wife, children, and so on? A creature is born alone and dies all by itself. Alone it enjoys the fruit of its good deeds, and alone does it reap the consequences of its misdeeds. Others, going by the names of son, etc., drain the unrighteously accumulated wealth of the foolish one, as the brood of an aquatic animal shares its waters. Life, riches, and sons, etc., that a man nourishes through unrighteousness under the false notion that they are his own, ultimately forsake the stupid fellow for good, when he has not yet accomplished his purpose. Deserted by them when his object has not been achieved, and carrying his sins, a man who is ignorant of his own real interest, and therefore has his face turned away from his own duty, himself descends into the dismal Naraka. Therefore, realizing this world, O Raja, to be a dream, illusion, or fancy, and controlling your mind with your reason, be composed and impartial, O Lord. Dhritarashtra replied, As you tender this salutary advice, O prince among the charitable, I do not feel sated with it any more than a mortal would on securing nectar. Still, your wholesome and agreeable counsel, O gentle one, does not stick into my fickle mind, biased as it is through attachment to my sons, any more than than a flash of lightning remains in a cloud. Rather, it flashes for a moment and then is again gone. What man can possibly set aside, even indirectly, the decree of the Almighty Lord, who, I am told, has appeared in the race of Yadu for removing the earth's burden? Hail to that supreme Lord, who, having evolved this creation by his own creative energy, whose ways cannot be easily conceived, and entered it afterwards, apportions duties and their rewards, and whose pastime, difficult to comprehend, is mainly responsible for the movement of the wheel of transmigration. Sri Shuka went on. Having thus come to know the mind of Dhritarashtra, and duly permitted by his relatives, the aforesaid Akrura, a scion of Yadu, returned to Mathura, the capital of the Yadus. Reaching Mathura, he purported to Balarama and Sri Krishna the conduct, in particular of Dhritarashtra, towards Yudhishthira and others, the sons of Bandu, for which purpose, O Parikshit, he had been personally sent by them. Thus ends the 49th discourse in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahamsa Samhita, a collection of 18,000 shlokas composed by the sage Veda Vyasa, and that is the end of the first half of Book 10. Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 10, second half. We start with Discourse 50. The Lord ensconces himself in a fortress. Sri Shuka began again. Their husband being dead, Asti and Prapti, the two wives of Kansa, O Parikshit, foremost of the Bharatas, went away stricken with sorrow to the house of their father, so the tradition goes. Seized with agony, they made known to their father, Jarasandha, the ruler of the Magadhas, all that had contributed to their widowhood. Full of grief and indignation to hear that unpleasant story, O protector of men, since they evidently took Kansa's side. Jarasandha put forth a supreme endeavor to rid the earth of the Yadavas. Protected by 23 Akshalhinis, or large divisions of troops, he besieged Mathura, the capital of the Yadus, on all sides. Taking a full view of his army, which resembled an ocean that had overflowed its banks, of his own city besieged by it, and of his people, stricken with fear, Sri Krishna, who was no other than Lord Sri Hari, appearing in a human semblance from some motive, pondered over the purpose of his avatarana, as well as on what was equal to the time and place in question. And he thought to himself, I shall certainly destroy this army of all dependent chiefs brought together by Jarasandha, the ruler of the Magadhas, reckoned as many Akshalhinis strong and consisting of foot soldiers, cavalry, chariots, and elephants, a concentrated burden on the earth. Jarasandha, however, is not to be killed, as, if I let him go, he is expected to put forth renewed efforts to mobilize another army, and thus Krishna will be spared the trouble of hunting down all the evildoers, because Jarasandha will keep gathering them into big groups and bringing them straight to Krishna. This present avatarana of mine is directed towards this very end, removing the earth's burden, protecting the virtuous, and wiping out the vile. Other divine forms, too, are duly assumed by me for the vindication of righteousness, as well as for putting a stop to unrighteousness gaining ascendancy during certain periods. While Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, was thus contemplating, there presently alighted from the heavens 2 chariots, possessing the effulgence of the sun, and each accompanied by a charioteer, and fitted with appurtenances, such as armor and ensign. There also appeared, of their own accord, eternal divine weapons of the Lord. Perceiving them, Sri Krishna, the controller of the senses, immediately spoke to Sankarshana. See, noble brother, the calamity that has come upon the Yadus, of whom you are the guardian, O Lord. Here is your chariot come, as well as your favorite weapons. Mounting the vehicle, sweep off this army and completely deliver your people from the disaster that stares them in the face. Surely to this end is directed our avatarana, which brings happiness to the virtuous, O Lord. Remove the earth's burden going by the name of these 23 Akshalhinis. Having thus fully deliberated, Balarama and Sri Krishna, the 2 scions of Dasharha, rode out of the city of Mathura in their respective chariots, clad in armor, and armed with their own weapons and surrounded by a very small detachment of troops. Coming out of the city into the open land, Sri Hari, who had Daruka for his charioteer, blew his conch, thereby challenging the enemy to encounter them. From that followed a shivering, occasioned by terror, in the heart of the enemy's ranks. Looking intently at the 2 divine brothers, Jarasandha, the ruler of the Magadhas, said to them, O Krishna, vilest among men, for very shame I do not wish to fight with you, a youngster, especially when you are alone. I am not going to have an encounter with you, stupid fellow who remained concealed so long. Get away, O slayer of your own maternal uncle. If there is an itching in you for a combat, O Balarama, offer battle to me and have patience to see the result. Casting off your body torn with my shafts, ascend to heaven or slay me if you can. The glorious Lord replied, the valiant never brag, they only exhibit their manliness. We do not, however, take your words to heart, O king, full of grief as you are over the death of your son-in-law Kamsa, and about to die yourself. Sri Sukha continued. Marching towards Balarama and Sri Krishna, the two scions of Madhu, Jarasandha, the foster son of the demoness Jara, Jarasandha was born, he was stillborn in two pieces, and they were buried. A whole funeral was performed, and a demoness named Jara joined the two pieces of this dead baby together and resurrected him from the dead. And he went on to become a powerful king, but this demonic magic that animates his body and gave him life kind of runs through him and corrupted his character to an extent, inclined him to evil. So he surrounded them, including their troops, vehicles, flags, horses, and charioteers, with a very powerful and huge multitude of troops, even as a tempest would envelop the sun, and a fire with clouds and particles of dust, respectively. Stricken with grief not to perceive on the battlefield the chariots of Sri Krishna and Balarama, distinguished with ensigns bearing the emblems severally of Garuda, the king of birds, the carrier of Lord Vishnu, and a palmyra tree, the women of Mathura, who had climbed up to the attics on the fort and the tops of mansions and gates of the city to be able to try to see this in a distance, fell into a swoon. Seeing his own small force oppressed with the formidable shower of shafts repeatedly discharged by clouds in the shape of hostile troops, metaphorically calling them like rain clouds raining down arrows, Sri Hari twanged his excellent Sharanga bow, esteemed by the gods and demons alike, taking arrows out of his quiver and fitting them, pulling the string at full length and discharging volleys of sharp arrows and striking down chariots, elephants, horses, and foot soldiers on all sides without interval. The Lord whirled as a revolving firebrand. Elephants fell dead with the frontal globes on their foreheads split up. Horses dropped dead in large numbers with their necks cut off with shafts. Chariots toppled down with their horses, ensigns, charioteers, and masters struck down, and foot soldiers fell prostrate with their arms, thighs, and necks severed. On the field of battle were set flowing in hundreds, streams of blood issued from the bodies of foot soldiers, elephants, and horses that were being mowed down, streams in which arms of fallen soldiers floated like serpents, the heads of men like tortoises, their hands and thighs like fishes, the locks of men like duckweeds, and their excellent and big gems and ornaments like gravel and stones. The streams were thick with shoals in the shape of killed elephants and alligators in the shape of slain horses. They were full of waves in the shape of bows and bushes in the shape of other weapons, and looked terrible with eddies in the shape of shields or wheels. They brought terror to cowards and encouragement to the valiant of one army to give battle to the other. By Sankarshana, of immeasurable prowess, even as he was annihilating the vainglorious enemies with his pestle, a pestle used as a club, was brought to destruction that force led by Jarasandha, the king of the Magadhas. Though it was hard to cross and fearful like the ocean, and unfathomable and seemingly endless, O dear Parikshit. That was a mere amusing play on the part of Sri Krishna and Balarama, the two sons of Vasudeva, the rulers of the universe. The discomfiture of the enemy's forces is no wonder on the part of the Lord, who carries on the creation, preservation, and annihilation of the three worlds by way of his sport, endowed as he is with endless attributes. Still the story is told as of him who imitates the ways of mortals, and so they fought like two Kshatriya youths, though capable of destroying any army whatsoever in an instant by mere will. As a lion would seize another lion with force, Balarama caught hold of Jarasandha, who, though very powerful, had lost his chariot and was left with his life alone, his forces having been wiped out. With intent to accomplish his work, of concentrating all evil beings on the earth together to destroy them. Through him, Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, prevented his being bound by Balarama with the cords of Varuna, as well as with human ropes, although he had himself killed numberless redoubtable foes in the past. Let go by Sri Krishna and Balarama, the two lords of the universe, and therefore ashamed, Jarasandha resolved upon austerities, but was stopped on the way. So resolved upon austerities means so ashamed was he at his defeat and at having been captured and defeated and at the mercy of his enemies, and they let him go, which was a further shame to him. He resolved to abdicate from the throne of Magadha and take sannyas, but was stopped on the way by other kings, such as his friend and associate Shishupala, the ruler of the Chedis and another sworn enemy of Sri Krishna, though related to him by blood. By means of expressions consisting of words bearing sacred import, and even worldly counsels, saying, "This discomfiture at the hands of the Yadus has been sustained by you through the binding nature of your own past karmas." Ignored by the Lord, on all his battalions having been wiped out, King Jarasandha, son of Brahadratha, withdrew dispirited to the Magadha territory, his own dominions. But Shishupala and others had convinced him not to abdicate. Meeting the citizens of Mathura, that had now been rid of all agony, and felt delighted at heart, and had now come out to greet and felicitate their saviors, Lord Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, too returned. Sri Krishna, whose army remained unscathed, and who was applauded by the gods, and who was being covered with flowers, and that he had crossed without any effort the ocean of the enemy's forces, whose victory was being celebrated by Sutas, Magadhas. Now, Magadhas is totally different from Magadhas, like the men of Jarasandha. Magadhas is a word for bards. And Vandis. Conchas and drums, kettle drums, and clarionets, as well as lutes, flutes, and clay tom-toms, sounded while the Lord was entering the city, whose road had been sprinkled with water, which was full of merry men, was decorated with flags and resonant with the chanting of the Veda, and which had ornamental arches erected all around by way of festivity. Being strewn by women with flowers, curds, unbroken grains of rice, and sprouts, and lovingly regarded with eyes dilated through joy, the Lord presented to Raja Ugrasena, the ruler of the Yadus, all the untold wealth found lying on the field of battle, and the jewelry of the killed warriors that had been brought by him. Followed each time by an army consisting of the same number of Akshauhinis, Raja Jarasandha, the ruler of Magadha, fought in this way 17 times with the Yadus, who were protected by Sri Krishna and were therefore invincible. Endowed with the inexhaustible and unequaled might of Sri Krishna, the Vrishnis annihilated his entire force. Led off by the Yadus, on his troops having been killed, the monarch each time withdrew to his capital. While the 18th encounter was yet to come, Kala Yavana, a Yavana hero, meaning a mlecha, a foreign barbarian chieftain from Greece, dispatched by the sage Narada, appeared on the scene during the interval. Having heard from the mouth of Narada, of whom he had inquired the names of the foremost warriors on the earth's surface, of the Yadus as being his equals in prowess, Kala Yavana, who had no rival among men, came and besieged Mathura with 30 millions of mlechas. In this case, forces from the Mediterranean region and all across Scythia and Persia, foreign troops. Seeing him, Sri Krishna, who enjoyed the companionship of Sankarshana, thought, "Oh, a great calamity has surely overtaken the Yadus from both sides, Kala Yavana and Jarasandha. This Yavana, who is followed by a huge army, has certainly invested us today." Invested being a way of saying encircled, surrounded us. Jarasandha will also come, either today or tomorrow, or at the latest, the day after tomorrow. If Jarasandha, the foster son of the demoness Jara, comes while we are both engaged in contending with this fellow, Kala Yavana, the mighty Jarasandha will make short work of our relations or take them away to his own capital. Therefore, we shall this day construct a citadel which will be difficult of access to bipeds, and having ensconced our relations there, shall return and have the Yavana killed by stratagem. Having deliberated thus, the Lord caused a fortress to be built in the western sea by Vishvakarma, the architect of the gods, as well as a city inside the fortress, extending over an area of 12 yojanas, or 96 square miles, and containing all wonderful things, a city in which expert knowledge of architecture, as well as unique Masonic skill, stood revealed, built as it was by Vishvakarma or Tvashtadeva, and which was specially constructed with roads, streets, and quadrangles conforming to the site. It was duly provided with gardens consisting of celestial trees and creepers, as well as with wonderful groves, and was built with attics and gateways of crystal, touching the very heavens with their domes of gold, barns of silver and brass adorned with gold pitchers, houses of gold with tops of jewels and floors of emerald, temples dedicated to the deities presiding over the foundation of houses and homesteads, etc., and wooden sheds on the roofs of houses. The city was crowded with men belonging to the four orders of society, and shone forth with palaces belonging to the rulers of the Yadus, Ugrasena and Vasudeva and Balarama and Sri Krishna. The great Indra sent down from heaven as a present for Sri Krishna his famous assembly hall, known by the name of Sudharma, as well as the Parijata tree, one of the 5 well-known species of celestial trees, stationed under the shade of which a mortal does not remain tied down with the characteristics of mortals: hunger and thirst, old age and death, grief and infatuation. So as long as one stays in the shade of a Parijata tree and does not walk away anywhere else, you can go indefinitely without needing food or drink, and you will not age. Varuna, the god of water, sent down milk-white horses with one dark ear and swift as thought. Kubera, the lord of treasures, sent the 8 treasures, and the guardians of other spheres, the riches peculiar to themselves. Sri Hari himself, having come down to the earth in the form of Sri Krishna, a protector of men, others, such as the Siddhas, too, returned to him in toto whatever lordship had been granted by the Lord for the execution of their charge, transferring all the people of Mathura to that retreat by dint of yoga, so just teleporting them there. It's a long way away, like many miles. It would have been a very long journey for them to travel from Mathura to this new city, which is going to be given the name of Dwaraka. But he just teleports them all there. And having duly conferred with Balarama, who was looking after the rest of the people, Sri Krishna, the dispeller of the agony of his devotees, issued out of the city gate of Mathura, wearing a garland of lotuses and unarmed, to encounter the armies of Kalayavana. Thus ends the 50th discourse, entitled "The Lord ensconces himself, or rather his people, in a fortress," and the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I think we should probably end there. It's almost 10. And we next get into the whole story of how Krishna single-handedly and without weapons goes out and deals with Kalayavana, which is a somewhat lengthy story in itself. Yeah, thank you guys for coming. We're getting now into a section of kind of the lesser known stories of Krishna. His childhood leelas in Vrindavana are by far his best known stories. The stories of the rest of his life, other than like the Bhagavad Gita, tend to not be as well known. And so there's quite a few other ones coming up that aren't as famous like this.
Wow. So he just he just manifested this palace. Where was this again?
The Bhagavatam has not yet fully explained where it is, perhaps kind of going by the perspective of the people of Mathura, who probably don't know where they're being teleported to.
Right.
They just appear in this fantastic heavenly city. But where it is it was on a peninsula on the western coast of Gujarat, extending out into the Arabian Sea.
Amazing.
In coming discourses, the geography will be explained in detail, but that's where it is.
Wow. And
Yeah.
so this what's this character's name from the Mediterranean area?
Kala Yavana. Yeah. The Yavanas are Greeks.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's an interesting element.
Mm-hmm.
I had heard that Bhima had a wife who was from Ethiopia, for instance.
Yeah, I've heard mention of this as well. Yeah, I mean there's definitely people traveled around sometimes in the ancient world for sure. You have at this point a huge army. They're probably not all Greeks, but their ruler is Greek, and they're all foreign. They're probably from across the whole. He probably was some great warlord who raised troops from across the Mediterranean region, from across ancient,
Yeah.
what later became Scythia and Persia, um, all of those lands. So yeah, a bunch of a foreign conqueror who entered into India from the west.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting twist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
cool.
Thank you guys for coming, and happy Mahashivaratri tomorrow night.
Right. Now, so there are ceremonies at the Devi Mandir temple here in town.
Yes.
Now, it's, of course, a lot of people are announcing Shivaratri to be on March 1st. But I know, like depending on the moon phase or whatever, right, is when we locally celebrate things.
There's different. All of the it's common for different for dates to have different calculations by different sampradayas, different traditional groups. But
right.
All the local pundits are celebrating it tomorrow night.
That's right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, maybe David, I'll maybe see you at the temple for the evening. I'll be there for the evening. Will you be there?
I will. Yeah.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah. Mahashivaratri. Amazing.
Yep. All right. Thank you, guys.
Great. Blessings. Namaste, Mary. Namaste, Devalo.